The seventh unnumbered vision of the book of Revelation is found in Revelation chapter 15, verses 2 through 4. That's what we want to take a look at this week on Fridays with Phil. I'm Dr. Phil Mayo, and I'd like to share with you just a few minutes of biblical insight to help you along the way. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to subscribe. In chapter 15, verse 2 is the beginning of the seventh unnumbered vision. Let's begin reading in Revelation 15:1 to get an idea of what John is doing here in this portion of the apocalypse. Revelation 15:1, John says, I saw in heaven another great and marvelous sign, 7 angels with the 7 last plagues. Last, because with them God's wrath is completed. So here we see the introduction of this last set of sevens. We had the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, then the 7 unnumbered visions. Now we're going to get the 7 bowls. In verse 2 he says, And I saw what looked like a sea of glass glowing with fire, and standing beside the sea, those who had been victorious over the beast and its image, and over the number of its name. They held harps given them by God, and sang the song of God's servant Moses and of the Lamb. I want to stop there because there's a few observations I want to make here very quickly. One, of course, is we have the introduction of the next set of 7. But before we get to those 7 angels with the 7 bowls, we have the scene of the last of the 7 unnumbered visions. This scene is set around the throne of God. We know that because one says in verse 2 that John saw what looked like a sea of glass glowing with fire, and standing beside the seas were those who had overcome the beast and been victorious over his image and had not taken his mark. The last time we saw this image of a sea like glass, clear as crystal, was in the throne room scene of Revelation chapter 4. So this is a group of saints that are gathered in front of the throne of God. What's interesting here is that we see the same thing that we saw in Revelation chapter 7 with 144,000. Now, in Revelation 14, we did a video, we talked about the first 4 verses of Revelation 14 where the 144,000 are standing on Mount Zion with the Lamb. And here now in chapter 15, verse 2, they're standing, there's this great multitude standing before the throne of God. In Revelation 7, it was the same thing. We heard the numbering of the 144,000, and then the next scene was a group of God's people from every nation, tribe, language, and ethnic group standing before the throne of God, and they were the ones, John says, that have come out of the great ordeal or the great persecution, and they have robes of white. Here, once again, we're seeing this similar kind of image of those who are standing before the throne of God who have been victorious over the image of the beast and the number of his name, which means that they have come out of that great ordeal or that great persecution that they've experienced under the authority of the beast that is described in chapter 13. And what are they doing? Well, they're singing a song. And the way the song is described is also very interesting. It says they held harps and they sang the song of God's servant Moses and of the Lamb. This is very interesting because the way that John here in the Revelation is combining the people of God, both Old Testament and New Testament. And remember that the terms Old Testament and New Testament are not being used in this time period where John is located at the end of the first century. That is not something that didn't develop until toward the end of the second century. So he doesn't look at the Bible, or what is his Bible, of course, are the Hebrew Scriptures. He doesn't look at the people of God as being Jews and Gentiles. He looks at them as one people who hold to the testimony of Jesus. And so you see here that they sing the song of the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the Lamb. And what's also interesting about this is back in Revelation chapter 12, near the beginning of these 7 unnumbered visions, at the very end of chapter 12, when the dragon is trying to destroy the woman, but he cannot, he decides to go after her offspring. And this is the way her offspring are identified: those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the testimony of Jesus. I think this is interesting because if you think about keeping the commandments of God as being something more of an Old Testament concept, which incidentally really isn't, because we keep the commandments of God whether we're living in a New Testament era or the Old Testament era. But the way he combines keeping the commandments of God and holding to the testimony of Jesus. So these are the people of God, for lack of a better way of saying it, both the Jew and Gentile, who who are following the Lamb. Later on in chapter 15, he says this, which is also imagery drawn from the Old Testament. He says in chapter 15, verse 5, "And the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was open." The temple of the tabernacle of the testimony was opened in heaven. This word testimony in Greek is martyreo. It's the verb martyreo, which is the word from which we get martyr. But at this point in time in history, that connection may not have yet been made. But this word testimony appears very prominently in the book of Revelation. And this idea, you see this idea of a reference to the tent of the tabernacle that goes all the way back to the wilderness. But really in Revelation, you see this kind of language of temple language. We've seen it with the golden altar, um, in other language that's used throughout the book of Revelation to show that God is in his temple, meting out judgment on the nations and fulfilling his plan. But going back to the song that they sing, here's what they sing in Revelation 15, verse 3. "Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the nations." Okay, so we're seeing God once again celebrated as having overcome the nations and ruling them. We saw this in Revelation 12 with that song that was sung after the defeat of Satan. We see this kind of song again. It's not the first time that such salvation has been celebrated. We saw it in the seventh trumpet as well. Verse 4, who will not fear you, Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. So you see the people of God celebrating the victory of God in this seventh unnumbered vision, which seems to be a consistent kind of pattern throughout the book of Revelation, where you see this in the seventh trumpet and now in the seventh unnumbered vision. The celebration of the victory of God, but still there's things left to be done. And the next thing that has to be done, of course, is the pouring out of the seven bowls in the seven last plagues, which we'll consider next week on Friday with Phil. Won't you join me? Thank you, and God bless you.